Hello everyone, I am Nu-Trix and today I'm going to dive into the Korg MS-20. In a virtual format, I'm using the one made by Arturia that is part of the latest Vintage Collection 9. What's interesting is that the MS-20 today exists in so many different formats. You have them in virtual from different companies. You have them also in hardware from the original to reissue to mini to full size. The question then is asked is why is it so popular? Because it sounds good. The filter in it has its own nature or reaction and attitude if you want. Well, listen to this. But also the fact that this is a very simple and complex synthesizer. The fact that it is a synthesizer that is what we often call semi-modular, meaning if you don't patch anything into it, the whole synthesis engine is already connected in a way that you can just tweak the knob and play some sound. It just works like any other subtractive synthesis that you found out there. It works. But then the other part of the synthesizer, the right part of the synthesizer, the patch section, opens up the whole synthesis to do something else, to become completely modular if you want. It's like having access to all of these little sections of modules, but then in a package. So if you don't know how to patch, you can still use it. If you know how to patch, you can expand this. And it was and is still is a great sounding synth, but also a great learning synthesizer because you can start from scratch by not patching anything. And as you learn more and you explore, you just learn a lot more about synthesis and you become more experienced and you figure out new ways to use it. Today's video is going to be about learning how the MS-20 works from scratch, a quick tour of the synthesis, what is in it and how you use it, and really rapidly going into how to use these different modulation that is part of it to control it, but then go to the patch area to learn at least basic stuff on how to use it. But there's something really cool about the MS-20 that was part of the original hardware device, and it is still part of the virtual version. The fact that this is capable of receiving external input from outside of the machine and use this to control the internal synthesizer. What I mean by that is you could originally take a guitar and use the guitar to play it or to at least interface with it. So any sound can come in. You can actually follow the pitch and use the envelope generator to trigger new things. So it becomes really complex and interesting. So we'll finish off this video with that part, how to actually use it, because it's obvious when you think about it in the hardware world, you patch a cable at the right place and you start to tweak. But in the virtual sense, you go, how do you patch external sound into it? It's not that difficult. But then how do you actually use the signal inside the MS-20 to become interesting? Let's do it. Before we start going through the MS-20, just remember that if at any point you're looking to understand more about it and you're kind of lost, remember that when you hover your mouse over a knob or a button, you will see the information. Like right now I see that it's a saw. Also, when you look at the bottom of the screen on the right side, you've got VCO2 waveform set to VCO2 waveform. So it tells you what this knob is for. And then as you move it, the information beside this, the mouse will change to show you what it is, but the bottom, just when you move from one knob to the other, will tell you what this knob is for. So really, it's kind of having a manual always at hand to, okay, figure out what this is for. And before you start using it, take the time to open the settings section and go into tutorials and follow that. It's really well made. They bring you to every section of the synthesizer. They give you examples of what you hear, how to use it. You follow the example. It's going to be really a time saver after that. And it's going to be an eye opener to what you can do with the MS-20. So now let's turn that off. And you've got two oscillators, oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. They're not the same. Oscillator 1 has four shapes, triangular, sawtooth, square, and noise. Well, the square is a pulse also. So you have a control over here, the pulse width. You go to a direct current signal, so then you don't hear it. You go back to a pulse and go back to a square. The second one, CO2, does not have that. You have a sawtooth, no triangular. You have a square, always the same shape, always square. You have a pulse that is always pulse. You have no control over the shape of it. And you have a ring modulation. Now, you don't hear it until you actually turn on the volume of the second one. Now we'll hear it. The other thing that is different, let's say we keep that like that, is that you can change the pitch of the second one. And you can also change these. The scale is not the same. You've got from 32 to 4. This one is just an octave higher, which is logical because most people use this. Like the first one would be the root key, and the second one would be kind of the harmonics over the root key. That's the logic. It can be in unison or off, separate, or you have also the VCO2 that can be synced to VCO1. So I'll come back to this one because I like that sound really, but we need to understand LFOs and envelope before we use this one, so we'll come back to that. You have here, you start to have modulation, but before we talk about modulation and all that, let's go through the whole signal flow of this. And you have it here, it's designed here. You see the oscillator 1, output goes into the VCO mixer, oscillator 2 goes into the mixer, output of the mixer goes into the high-pass filter, result of the signal goes into the low-pass filter, the result of the signal goes into the amplifier, and it's out. That's it. 2 oscillators, a mixer, 1 filter, another filter, and an amplifier, which is the traditional structure of most subtractive synthesizer. After the VCO mixer, it's a high-pass filter. So the high pass cuts the low frequencies. It could be a low cut if you want, but it's an high pass with the resonance. Okay. Same logic, but for the low pass. It's a low pass. Now there's something interesting, is that this is a low pass. This is the Mark II. Again, if you put your mouse on it and you look at the bottom, it says you can change the VCF circuit from the Mark I, which is a Korg 32 circuit for the filter, to the Mark II OTA version. So right now we're listening to the Mark II, which is in a way cleaner and has a more clear peak or resonance, whereas the other one, the Mark I, is more noisier, and the resonance is less aggressive, and it's kind of wider. You see? It's just like, it's aggressive. I prefer the Mark I, but keep in mind that the Mark I version asks for more CPU. So depending on your machine, you might want to go back to Mark II, but by default, I would like the grit and the noise of the Mark I. Makes it much more like in your face, but that's personal choice. Do what you want. And again, it depends on the sound you want to make. In my case, by default, I like it. So the other thing that is interesting about the high pass and low pass filter is the interaction between them. In the original synthesizer, I don't believe this was available, the link section. It means that right now, you see that this one is at 0, this one is at a little bit more than 5, it's 828 hertz. If I link them together with the same, it means that when you move them, both of them will move to the same amount, so they will be in the same relationship, like the space between them, 5.5 value, but then when you move them, they'll move in unison. They'll move at the same speed, at the same distance. So it's interesting. Again, if you want to change the relationship between the two, you turn it off, put it at 0, move it back where you want it, and then you turn it back on. The other option is to do the opposite. So as you go up, the other one goes down. So there's two ways to move them, and it's pretty awesome. Honestly, I like that movement. But this does not work still if you use the modulation. So if I use the modulation generator, which is basically an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. You've got an oscillator here moving at the speed of it, and you got how much modulation can control it, which is pretty awesome by default without even patching other things, is that you can change the speed of the LFO from another source. Here. So the two of them are separate. So even if they're linked here, it does not affect them when you use the modulation. They're still going to be unlinked for this value here. And if you want to use the other, which is the envelope generator 2, this one here, you can use this to open up the filter, close it down. Right now I have the envelope, which is an ADSR plus a hold at the beginning. And I've got the LFO assigned to my filter, which is the basic stuff you can have in most synthesizers. After that, I've got the amplifier modulation, kind of a tremolo. But notice something. It's an actual shape of the LFO is a triangular shape. It goes up and down, it glides rapidly, but it's a gliding. It's not an on-off, it's not a cut. If you look at the graphic here, you see that there's a triangular, and you have a square, you have a sawtooth, and we've got a pulse. So somewhere here, the internal connection is using the triangular / sawtooth version and not the square, because the LFO can do the two signal, can do a square wave or a pulse wave and a sawtooth that is also a triangular shape. When you look at the modulation here, and we'll right away start using the modulation here. So you've got the output that is the triangular wave, and you have the square here. So I'm going to take the square and send it to the amplifier. Now, so I'm taking the output here, assign it to the sidechain here. So now what you hear, it's on-off. Instead of, I'm going to bring that volume up, instead of being gliding, you have this. But still, I can still use this one to assign it to the filter, and still going to use this. So I have the LFO2, the square output goes to the amplifier, and the triangular shape goes to the filter. And it's the same LFO. Okay? First logic of how you can use this. Let's disconnect these for now. We have the envelope 1 and envelope 2. Envelope 1 is interesting because envelope 1 has a delay time, so before it starts, and you got attack and release. So mostly, I would say this is for percussive sounds or for some type of one-shot modulation, like especially pitch modulation. So you want the pitch to start high, goes to the right value, so you can start in a high value here. I'm going to bring that down, Okay. So in the pitch modulation, VCO2, I'm going to use envelope generator 1. Now listen, I'm into gate mode. So in gate mode, when I press the key, I go to the value of the pitch, and when I release, I hear the release. Because I've got a release here. Okay? If I don't have release, if I want to have attack, I'm going to bring that down. I'm going to bring that up. Okay? So in the pitch modulation, VCO2, I'm going to use envelope generator 1. Now listen, I'm into gate mode. So in gate mode, when I press the key, I go to the value of the pitch, and when I release, I hear the release. Because I've got a release here. Okay? If I don't have release, So it's good for this type of pitch control. And if you use the trigger, it will do the whole thing, attack and decay. See? Because now it's trigger, it doesn't use the length of the key you're holding. It just, when you trigger it, it goes through the whole length of the envelope. Whereas if you press gate, it stays until you release, then it goes into the release time. So different. And then there's the loop. Loop, it means that basically this becomes an LFO. It does up and down, depending on the speed you decided. Goes down, come back. Now, we talked about the sync earlier. Right now, what we're hearing is two different oscillators, one being drift out, the one is staying, so we hear the difference. But if we go into sync mode and turn it on, we put it higher. I like this one like that. You can do it less. And again. If we go back here, you see there's envelope generator 1 or there's external. So now let's open up a little bit more about using the patch section. So external means external for what? Well, actually, as I keep my mouse on the modulation amount here, look on the side, just under oscillator 2, you see frequency, +5, -5 voltage. Now it's in yellow with a ring around it. So now this means that if I want to send something to that, I need to patch it there. That's where it's going to be patched. So again, if I take my LFO we just talked earlier, patch it there. Now this value now is not using this thing anymore. It uses the square. Maybe not the best option in this case, but you understand you can patch stuff in as you work with this. So this is pretty cool. Now, you can really create massive weird stuff with this, and this is could be a whole class just on this and the logic of each of these, like a sample and hold and the VCA and the noise generator. What I'll do now, I'm going to show you how you can actually take any sound and send it inside the MS-20 and use it. Okay, so it's easy using the Arterias version, as you can actually move that aside and you go into a track. So I've got this track here. If you go back to the master track and I play it, okay, so what you have is a drum kit playing. I take the output, I send it to the sidechain input of the MS-20. So now it's going inside the MS-20. I don't hear it, but it goes into it. So if I click on it and I press a key, go, well, I don't hear it. Well, of course, because you need to use the patch. You've got external out. External out is the actual output of your DAW that goes into your Korg synthesizer. You take that and you patch it where you want. Let's say I'm going to say an external input. So it's going to be sent in parallel to the mixer information. It sends to the low pass and high pass filter. Now I hear it when I press the key because I'm opening up the amplitude using my keys, basically. So if I do now filter stuff out, so now I'm actually using this as a filter. I can have. So this is basically just an LFO filter for the drum coming in. But I want to go further than that. I want to use the drum, rhythm, and triggers to convert into a CV that I'm going to use here. So I'm going to take this output here and send that to the signal in. This external signal processor section is really cool for that. So you have the external signal, there's a volume coming in, so you can actually distort it. So have it a lot louder. It will actually clip into the amplifier. Then it goes into a bandpass filter. You got a low cut and you got an high cut. So you can actually decide what you want to control and how, let's say I don't want any kick. So I'm going to cut everything that is low. So I'm just going to keep, and the highest is like 1800 hertz. And the lowest is 109 hertz. So there's still going to be a space in between if you want to. And then you've got a frequency to voltage CV out. So this is actually it's going to convert the voltage coming in into pitch. So if I send it to the frequency here and I bring the volume up here, let's say I'm going to have these two. Now what I'm doing, I'm using this to control the pitch, but I could use this to control, let's say, the low pass. And then I would use this. So here that starts to be interesting. But then I want to have the shape of the drum playing. So there's the envelope follower. So as the output of the amplifier here, you send directly into the envelope follower. And the envelope follower, if I bring that down, is going to have less of a peak. And this envelope, I can send it to, I don't know, the amplifier. Distorts the input, so that you're kind of changing how it's going to result. And I can trigger something else and use the trigger out to trigger, I don't know, the envelope one. And if the envelope one is then to I don't want the kick, I don't want the hi-hats. So I said, well, I need to press the key. So, okay, let's not use the key. Let's use the trigger out then. And send the trigger out to the trigger in here. So now this one is triggering the amplifier now. So if I want it to be... I can control here the amplitude, the envelope. The envelope of the amplitude. And then if I want to combine this with the original sound, I can still take the external out, send it to external input. So I recombine what I just did with the original signal. So now this is slowly opening up and closing. That's it. It's a really fun way to create new, to add on to your drum or anything else with this. It takes the time. It takes a certain amount of time to do it, but this is so fun. That's it. That's a quick tour of how to use synthesis and how to use the external input or external output, whatever you want to call it, to bring external sound into it and have the synth react to it. Try it out, have fun, and this notion should work on any MS-20. See you soon. Stay safe, make music. See you soon. Cheers.